I had no purpose. I genuinely had no reason to live. So when I look at that particular day where I went to take my life and I paused, still to this day, I'm like, I'm so grateful for that moment, because I look at it and I'm like, wow, you paused, which means there was a reason to live.
Where did the energy come from to complete something like that?
I genuinely have no idea what got me through it back then. I don't, because I had no purpose. But the why behind what I do is so strong, quite frankly, I don't give a shit. Like, it's not going to stop me from doing what I'm doing. I want to do this until the day I die. I'm genuinely really excited to talk to you today.
Just a quick one. If you're enjoying The Energy Equation, please do like and follow wherever you get your podcasts. And if you leave us a review, we'll love you forever. Thanks so much. Josh, welcome to The Energy Equation.
Thank you so much for having me. Do you know what? I'm genuinely really excited to talk to you today. With the few conversations that we've had, the way you articulate yourself and your energy, you know when it's going to be a good conversation.
Well, that has set us up for an absolute ripper. I'm over the moon with that. Now, I know you. I've actually followed you for quite a while, because people in my sphere, those involved in well-being and in sport, will often follow you because of some of the extraordinary things you've done. If there's anyone listening that hasn't heard of you or the things you do, could you give us a quick run through of who Josh Patterson is?
Yeah, so I mean, I would like to think that over the years now, people may start to acknowledge the work that I do within the endurance space. It wasn't something that I ever thought I would have got into, but here we are. The journey has kind of brought me to this point where, sort of over the past 6 years in particular, I have essentially started to do world firsts or break world records. I did a couple years in a wheelchair, which is a whole conversation supporting a friend who was paralysed from a motorbike accident, and then transitioned into running, just to essentially give, well, it sounds silly, but to give the body a bit of a rest from being in that sort of position, which was really alien. And yeah, it's been a phenomenal journey, and I'm just learning so much about myself, but equally the people that I'm connecting with from that too. You know, for me, this isn't about just myself. It's about bringing everyone and anyone on this journey. So hopefully I can inspire as many people to start their own too.
I think that's a great summary. I mean, a casual runner, I'd be there on a cold Wednesday morning. I'd flip over my Instagram and I would see you on, marathon 33, and you ran 76 marathons in 76 days in 76 cities. And I can tell you what that was like to watch from the outside. It was incredible. It was a genuine case of, this is an extraordinary feat. And where did the energy come from to complete something like that?
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. That challenge, I think in particular for me, I've never had a reaction to any challenge like that before, and it really has. That's why this past 6 years has been such a journey, because you learn so much from each one, what can be improved, what went really well. And the energy really came from, I think, my past and the present and what I feel I could do for the future, and just individuals like yourself just engaging with it. And for me, what I've come to realize is it's, people always ask you, like, what's next? Is it going to be bigger? And actually what I've come to realize, it's not about the size of the challenge that matters. It's about the connection that you make with the people. And that's what we got right in this instance, is that, like many other challenges, I sit there, I come up with these ideas. And for me, just the gratitude that it's transitioned into something, it's become that reality. But for it to have connected with people on such a large scale, from people from completely different walks of life, that for me was one of the greatest successes of the challenge.
I mean, best summarised by, as you're coming into London on the final one, how many people joined you on that run?
I mean, it genuinely hundreds. And I mean, that in itself, I think for me was a huge moment where, when I first started this challenge, bear in mind, I'd been in the public eye, I'd been doing this for a number of years, and I got to the start line of my first marathon of 76. And I don't know, maybe there was an element where you fantasize about how many people will connect with you and run alongside you because of this core message. And one person showed up. And it threw me off, I'll be honest. I did expect there maybe to have been a bigger connection made, but actually looking back on that now, when you get to that final marathon, and I remember walking around that corner at Buckingham Palace and there were just hundreds upon hundreds of people that had eventually connected with it. It's just about timing. And for me, I think I have terrible imposter syndrome. And that moment was, like I said, really defining for me, where it's about consistency.
I get that. And I can imagine, I hope that imposter syndrome was diminished slightly as you cross that line to, again, an unbelievable crowd to turn out for such an event. Now, that's a massive energy combustion. And we're going to delve a little bit today into your physiology, which to me is extraordinary because I sit here and I wonder how. But I want to start by taking a helicopter view, one step back and say, you're looking at yourself, Josh, and you're saying, how is my energy as a collective? And if you had to rate yourself out of 100, with 100 being unlimited energy, able to do whatever you want, not just physically, but also emotionally, mentally, and 0, absolute fatigue, no drive. Where are you on average?
So that's a really, really great question, because for me, actually, and the reason why I'm so excited by this conversation is, how do you distinguish the difference between things? So in terms, like for me, is it determination or is it energy, right? Because for me, they're two different things. I'm an incredibly determined person because of my past, but my energy levels, I think, because of maybe, mental health, my mental health condition and stresses of life, can be diminished at times, but because of the determination, is that consistently outweighing it? And I think that's why, with the data that we've obviously got from the testing that's been done, it's going to be really insightful for me to try and understand myself more, because I think the common theme with every challenge we've ever done and the team that we put together is that I am an anomaly. It doesn't really make sense how I've maybe focused on these challenges, or how I've approached them and the outcome of them based on what's been done. I mean, in theory, on paper, it shouldn't work, but it does. And it's a tricky one. Energy-wise, like I said, I think there are so many variables that seem to impact me on a day-to-day basis. Let's go in at 85 out of 100. I don't know.
That's a great number. We'll come back to that number a little bit later. And I think that's a great challenge, Josh. What's the difference between energy, as in my physical ability to combust, versus my determination, which is I'll do it anyway. And I think where there's that mystique around some of the stuff you're doing is, from a physical energy perspective, it doesn't make much sense. You've got most people listening to this who couldn't imagine running a marathon, let alone getting up the following day and running another one and repeating that for 75 more days. I mean, that is the sort of thing where we say, look, that does become slightly unimaginable. So as a physiologist, I want to dive into that a little bit as well, because that task doesn't make sense from an energy point of view. I mean, sticking on that task, how did you do that?
Yeah, I mean, touching on that again, that's a really good question, because I think one of the biggest educations for me, I think, is when I think about things like my mental illness, right? Struggling with anxiety, having struggled with depression. When I look at what I have to do every single day to try and have clarity of mind, I rarely drink. If I drink with purpose. I eat well. Sleep isn't great, which I'm sure we're going to go into. Lifestyle is balance, exercise, but that's just about to make me feel as normal as I possibly can. So when it comes to data or like energy and things like that, I tend not to buy into it too much, because if I did, that in itself, I think, would have a negative impact on me, because on paper, again, like, I'm doing everything that I should be, and yet I'm only just what I would say is like touching that line of where I would like to be. When you have individuals out there that probably do a quarter of what I do, but probably feel exceedingly better, it's a confusing place to be in.
That makes perfect sense. And I assume from that, on that challenge in particular, and I want to come back to the anxiety and the depression and the lifestyle that helps with that. But on that particular challenge, one would assume then that was in the absence of data.
Absolutely. I mean, so when it comes to these challenges, I'll be honest with you, I have a core team who I trust entirely. And I give them one clear instruction, which is it's inevitable that I am going to sustain injuries. It's inevitable that I'm going to incur an awful lot of pain. What's important for me when you're in that position is that you can diagnose what the situation or the issue is, but do not tell me. I don't want to know. From the minute we start on day one to whatever day we finish, all I need you to do is ensure that I can keep going. If it ever gets to the point where the damage is irreversible, that's when we'll pull the plug. So for me, it's about the balance of things, right? Because I make it very clear that when we say we're going to do something, we don't amend it. Say if you incur an injury and you need 2 days to recover and then you continue it. If I say I'm doing 76 marathons in 76 days, that's it. If we get to marathon 75 and we have to pull the plug for a day or two for recovery, then the challenge, as far as I'm concerned, it's unsuccessful. And I just find with data, it's an interesting one. Outside of the challenge, I think it's something that I'm becoming more inclined to do to try and improve things in my life, because I don't want to wake up and feel exhausted or broken and in pain. And if I can improve that by learning certain things and amending it, then I'm all for it. But when it comes to the challenge, and this is my personal preference and view, this isn't anybody else's, I try and minimize the amount of things that can affect me and my performance. Because what I've come to realize over the past 6 years in particular, it never goes your way. And I think when you go into something and you've got to tick these boxes, if I do all this, then I know I'll feel good. Well, touching on what I said to you earlier, I know that I've ticked all these boxes and I'm still only just sort of like somewhat clear in my mind. So for me, it's trying to reduce the reasons to hinder your performance.
Brilliant. Makes perfect sense. And drawing back into some of those habits and behaviors. And let's think again of energy as this sort of useful output metric. What are 3 actions or behaviors that bring you good energy? And within that, I'm very much looking at that stability of mental health, suppression of anxiety, maybe relieving some of those symptoms of depression.
So people, number 1, words of affirmation. Changes the game for me. If I have the right team around me that understand my mechanics, what to say and what to do, we're unlimited in what we can achieve. And I think, again, that's an education throughout life, is I am very, very receptive to the good and the bad with people. If somebody remotely affects me or the environment that I'm in, that could be detrimental to my mental health, to my performance. But on the flip side, if they understand me, which my team do, my team are exceptional. They go above and beyond for me. And so it's my way of reciprocating that to them and saying thank you. So people, I think is number 1. Food, I would say, is number 2. I definitely notice a difference in performance and mindset if I find myself into a negative pattern of eating, which, again, the tricky thing is when you are in the position I'm in, what I may perceive as sort of like a negative cycle of eating to someone might actually be very normal. So again, I'm very mindful about what or how I portray that to someone, because you could look a bit of a plonker, to be honest with you. And then exercise. Exercise for me is key. Without it, I just would not function. And so I'm equally as interested by friends and family members who hate the thought of exercise and still are able to function every day. You just learn so much about one another, don't you?
You do. And that it's so interesting, your point that some people need to work harder to sustain a baseline compared to others. And that's one of the great tricky things, that you can't take a room of people and say that's the emotional response they'll all get to that dose of exercise, or that's the emotional response they'll all get to that psychological technique. And some people have to work harder to sustain status quo, which is a tough reality, but it is a reality. Those 3 are amazing, in terms of people, nutrition, and movement, and specifically exercise. Let's flip the narrative. 3 things that you try to manage and mitigate that drain your energy. Have you identified those?
People.
Yeah, here we go.
Massively so. I'm going through it right now. There are certain people in my life that are really affecting me, and it just comes down to, I think, emotional maturity.
It's a really healthy thing to identify. They say some people light up the room when they walk into it, and some people light up the room when they walk out. It's finding the right balance of both. Yeah,
exactly. And also, I think you have to be mindful of the individual too. sometimes you can be incredibly sensitive, or I can be incredibly sensitive to that. And for me, I have to be aware of actually what their environment is. How have they been raised? What have they gone on through their life? It's not always personal. Sometimes it might be, but sometimes it's not as well. So I think it takes a certain amount of maturity from yourself or acknowledgement to maybe improve that situation. That's one. That's one.
It's a good one.
Environment and location. So what I've come to realize is I was raised by the water. I'm a coastal boy, Norfolk through and through, and I'm in a city where this is completely alien to me. This isn't my tribe. This is very much a manufactured area. And, I think my team quickly realized when doing the 76 that any city we were in that was coastal by water, it didn't matter what condition I was in physically, mentally, I was just in my element. I was so much happier. And so being in this concrete jungle for me, it does affect me. Even, again, it's not just like the infrastructure, but again, the people that are within it. I love building connections. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Obviously, that doesn't really take place in this city. It's sort of a rejection of connection, right? So environment for me certainly is different. Greenery, being amongst nature. That's what I love about running, is that running can take me around the world, especially in nature. And that is when I'm at my happiest. And then third, I would say belief. Is that an odd one to have? A lack of belief, maybe.
Nothing's odd. I think it's a great one. Lack of belief in self.
I would say maybe individuals' lack of belief in me. And again, that maybe come down to certain people. I think when individuals don't give you the opportunity that you need or you want, I think it's that empowerment that sometimes is lacking. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, very strong. Imagine this. There's one simple thing you could add to your daily routine that could help you sleep better, feel less anxious, and even support your hormone balance, all without having to change too much else in your life. That sounds too good to be true, right? Well, here's the kicker. 75% of us are missing out on it. Not because it's rare, but because it's incredibly difficult to get enough of this from our diet alone. It's something our bodies can't store long term, which means we need to replenish it every single day. The foods that used to give us plenty, leafy greens, seeds, whole grains, they just don't have the same levels in them anymore. So who is this mystery hero? It's magnesium. And here's the best part. It's really easy to add it to your routine through a quality supplement, just once a day. Having researched this supplement for years, I personally use Pure Sports Ultra Magnesium. Across their supplement range, every batch is tested, so you can trust that it's clean, simple, and extremely effective, so I highly recommend them. For 10% off, you can use the exclusive Energy Equation discount on their site, puresport.co. Use the code EE10 at checkout. On the topic you mentioned already of mental health, one of the great challenges of depression in particular is its close parallel with fatigue. When you were in that position of depressive episodes, where was the energy coming from? How did you use lifestyle, or did you use lifestyle to reduce the symptoms of depression?
Yeah, do you know what? It's so interesting. So I mean, I look back at this now and I genuinely have no idea what got me through it back then. I don't, because I had no purpose. I had no reason to live. That's what blows my mind. I genuinely had no reason to live. I wasn't good at anything. I didn't have a craft. There was no job. There was no prospect of a job, apart from like my family who naturally will believe in you and support you. There was nothing. I had no relationship. No real connections. It blows my mind. And so when I look at that particular day where I went to take my life and I paused, I still to this day, I'm like, I'm so grateful for that moment, because I look at it and I'm like, wow, you paused, which means there was a reason to live, but I still don't have the answer of what that reason was. But everything does happen for a reason. And I think I'll probably go through my life trying to understand it. Whereas now, the greatest gift I have is my daughter, and it is my passion for people. And I've come to realize that that's my purpose in life. My purpose now, through gratitude of a second chance of life, is to serve and help as many people as I possibly can who are going through different forms of adversity. It doesn't even have to be connected to mental illness. I think one of the greatest gifts that comes with adversity is empathy. And so few people in this world seem to have that quality. And actually, when you have it, it just opens up everything. And so for me, I come from privilege, and I'm really honest about that. I think too often people try and hide it and mask it, or they're embarrassed. You can't choose which environment you're born into. I'm very fortunate that I came from a home that enabled me opportunities around the world. And so for me, it's about giving it back to people now. I mean, I struggled with that privilege in the sense that even with the resources I had to get me through it, I still struggled. To be struggling and not have those resources or support network behind you is, for me, just unimaginable. So for me, I need to be that person who can support those individuals. And that's why I do these challenges, because it enables me to connect with these individuals from different walks of life. And although my background to some might disconnect as such, I feel like by what we're doing right now and having these conversations, it's not about money. It's not about what school you went to or colour of your skin. It just comes down to just the raw passion about change, right? And so for me, it's irrelevant what background you have. If you're struggling, I'm there for you. My best friend Tano, my little girl, when she was a baby, I was introducing her to him and a few other friends for the first time, and it was the most incredible day. And then on his motorbike on the way home, he was hit by another motorbike and paralysed from the waist down and was told he'd never walk again. And there was a conversation that we had that really changed my life, but I connected with as a parent, where he called me from the hospital and said, "Listen, bud, I've been told I'm never going to walk again. I've cried for about 10 minutes. I'm past that now. It's time to move on and change the narrative. Fern, right now, my little girl is 12 years old, but one day she's going to be old enough to get married. And when she is, I am going to be the man who walks her down the aisle. Are you going to help me?" And it just changed everything. So for me, to not be in that position and be grateful that I had the ability to do the things that he may not at that point, but also to wake up every day knowing that my purpose in life not only was to support my little girl, but was to ensure my best friend would walk again. It didn't matter what mental condition I was going through or how often I was going through it or how intense it was getting, it was never going to outweigh the purpose that I had.
Amazing. And then I want to talk about your lifestyle that's enabled that, because the things you started picking up were physical, and certainly for your friend, you became accustomed to a wheelchair and completed some unbelievable tasks for that. How did you build fitness to complete a task of? Did you joggle in a wheelchair?
Yeah, so we started out with Berlin with Tano. So that's when he went, "Listen, bud, a year from now, I've signed us up to the Berlin Marathon. I need a focus. Will you do it with me?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." So I thought he meant run it, and he actually wanted me to do it in a wheelchair. And with my platform, I just thought, this could be an amazing way to expose this to people, to showcase to individuals what adversity individuals face with spinal injuries. So for me, it wasn't just a case of just training within a wheelchair. I would commute to work in the chair. I would literally be in my office in the wheelchair. I would never get out of it if there were issues with curbs or whatever it may be, just because for me, I really needed to understand the highs and the lows, or as many of them I could, to connect with my friend when he was going through it, so I could give him the most sound advice if he was to ever reach out to me. And that experience was phenomenal, because so much in my life at that time just went to shit. I don't know if I can swear. Sorry if
Absolutely can.
Beep. We'll just beep that out. And it saved me generally. Like I went into this challenge trying to support my friend, and actually the roles had reversed, where so much had gone wrong at that point. And, my friend got me through it, and it was a really special time. And I had such a love for it, and I connected with so many people that I never would have met. And so for me, I wanted to continue this journey, and that's where the idea of John O'Groats to Land's End came in, where I just thought there's no bigger challenge in a wheelchair than that within the UK. And I ended up breaking the world record. I did it in 19 days. The previous record was 22 days. And I mean, physically and mentally, there is so much to talk about when coming to that challenge, because I just learned so much about myself, and just from a psychological state, I experienced flow state, or my interpretation of what flow state is, for the first time. And if I could get everyone in life to just experience that once, no matter what or goal you set yourself in life, it's possible.
That is, and there's almost a need for two Josh interviews, because there's the part of me that wants to go, listen, Josh, how on earth does someone do 19 days in a wheelchair, who's not been in a wheelchair all their life? How on earth does someone do 76 marathons, 76 days? And I think that's probably warrants a part two. And in terms of the training regime of that, I'm also interested in how you manage lifestyle on a normal day. And that might not be a word that's even relevant, but certainly the structure you've built to cope with mental health in between the challenges. So if we look at your lifestyle in the domains of stress management, diet, we've touched on a little bit, fitness, sleep, of those areas, which one's your Achilles heel?
So for me, I think sleep is definitely my Achilles heel. I have a very unhealthy relationship with sleep. I would also say consistency, like in terms of like routine, is completely out the window. The issue I have right now is that, when people say, what do you do for a living? Like my life day to day is just so stretched. I own a running app with my two business partners, which is continuing to grow more and more, and that involves events and affiliates to go and mentor them with what they do. I have my social platforms, so campaigns, so agency related stuff. Then I have my challenges, so then my physical training, my mental conditioning that goes into it too, and then side projects, certain things that I'm working on right now, which I'll be releasing. And the issue I have with that is that it's undiagnosed, but I'm 99% sure I have ADHD. And for me, I'm my most effective when I'm present. And the problem I have with everything I've just told you there is I literally can't be, because I'm so distracted by everything that's going on. The reason why I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but the reason why I love these challenges so much is because it's when I'm at my most peaceful, which blows people's minds, because for them, they just find the concept of it like madness. And yet for me, it's just the beauty of waking up each day and you only have one singular thing to do is something that's just rarely happens in my life.
We as a team were talking earlier about how much we love train journeys and we love plane journeys, because when you're on a train or a plane, that's all you can do.
Yeah.
Is that the feeling you're getting when you're on one of these challenges? It's I'm singularly focused on that one thing.
100%, because people respect the fact that you can't just do this and you can't just do that. For me, it's wake up, eat my breakfast, get dressed, put my shoes on and go run, whatever distance it might be. And it's amazing. And just the people that come with you and you can connect with, and the conversations you have with them, they really like lift your spirits. Whereas, like I said, when you're back here, because you haven't necessarily created an environment that just, positive people gravitate to, naturally, because you're in a city, you have less control over that. So people are naturally going to come into your circle that don't necessarily correlate with how you view things or how you like things to be approached. And that's fine, but I find it is very disruptive, and with that comes the stress, and with the stress, I think the impact on my sleep. I have pretty brutal nightmares. Whenever I have checked the data on my sleep with my smartwatch, I might get an hour of deep sleep a night when I should be definitely having far more than that. Probably the time that I get to sleep, but equally the time that I get up. And I think for a very long time, having such a young daughter too, any parent will understand this. I don't ever really fully go into a deep sleep. I think when I have her, again, I think the concerns of being in a city, it is just that gradual thing where it just takes its toll.
And is that toll something you feel, or something, do you wake up feeling refreshed, or because you've been in light sleep, or you haven't got many hours, you're just assuming it's a problem? Is it something you feel, or something the data or
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say, because of the challenges I do isn't time-based. I'm not trying to break the fastest marathon time, for instance, but I'm running consecutive marathons. You can kind of get away with it. I definitely would say, as I'm getting older, I can feel it, but the why behind what I do is so strong. Quite frankly, I don't give a shit. Like, it's not going to stop me from doing what I'm doing. It's an inconvenience, but I'm still going to get it done because what I'm trying to achieve again outweighs any negative data that I might be incurring. I also think it's got to the point where, and this is where I'm improving things and I'm in a much better place mentally, where I've managed to do these things, I would say, at such a basic level, as in like poor sleep, poor nutrition, lifestyle probably not great, overtraining. And so like the feeling of just being exhausted and broken was just like a regular thing for me, or a lack of nutrition rather than poor nutrition. Whereas now, for me, what it's about is just, I love my body. I want to respect it and I want longevity in this space. I want to do this until the day I die. So in order to do that, although my body has the ability to react to all those negatives now, realistically 10 years from now it might not be the case. So if I can just make those small improvements now to help that progression 10 years from now, then that's what I'm going to do.
Really good. It almost leads us to start thinking about the data, Josh. We after all this hatred of data, I've made you wear a monitor to measure some things that you generally don't like to measure, but we're going to do it in a way that, again, is a snapshot. So it's not, again, what's going on all the time, but the data is going to give us a chance to look at how we feel your body's reacting to stress. It's going to give us a marker of your cardiovascular fitness. It's going to give us a marker of your sleep, and it's going to give us a marker of your overall physical activity levels. So stress, sleep, fitness, activity. So should we have a look at the data?
I would love to.
So the first thing we're doing is we're going to score your overall lifestyle out of 100. I say we, the technology, I'm independent, and see across the areas of how much time your body spends in what we might call a stress state, how much time your body spends recovering energy, how physically active you are, and how well you sleep. And the aggregate for those is a score of 85 out of 100. Now, I seem to remember someone telling me his energy was about 85 out of 100. So far, we've got a perfect pair. We've got the way you feel, and we've got the results on the screen. Let's start with the strongest area. So it would be, again, it doesn't take a particularly advanced piece of technology to say Josh is probably quite fit. We look at the volume of exercise you do, not just in around the events, the challenges, but also as part of your daily baseline uptake. And we get a chance to quantify something called your VO2 Max, which is an objective marker of how cardiovascularly fit you are. And it's something that's used, again, to determine potential athletic performance in runners, cyclists, lots of things that you do. We normally like a score for a VO2 Max of something above 40. People who train quite often would like to be over 45. Good intermittent athletes, rugby players, footballers might be in their 50s. When you start getting over 60, you're into, serious aerobic athletes. And we've got a result for you of 62, which is great. Now, why that's great is for two reasons. A, because it's a massive score, but also because that value is how many milliliters of oxygen per kilogram, and you're not a light guy. In fact, one of the most obvious things about you, for those who are listening, would be that you carry a significant volume of muscle mass. So you're not a waif-thin sort of marathon runner physique, quite the opposite.
Yeah. And I think that's what has intrigued so many people, is that for me, I think that's something that I'm trying to achieve within running is redefining what a runner can look like. You've just nailed it on the head. So many people, I think, have this ideology that to be a runner, you tend to be a much smaller frame. And actually what I'm trying to say is you can be any frame you like. For me, it's more just the enjoyment or the reason behind why you run. And you're right, in terms of the muscle mass density that I might have in comparison, it is much harder, but I think it is just, it's adaptation, right?
But it'll also be down to the fact you would not keep that volume of muscle unless you did significant exercise to keep that muscle. So it brings us almost back out to what you do. We know from the running, ever since I think the first challenge I saw you do was you ran a marathon in your garden during COVID.
Yeah, that's correct.
Which again made me feel inadequate about myself. So thanks for that. But the muscle mass thing is really interesting. So what proportion of your training is dedicated to weights?
Again, great question. S&C was something that I was fundamentally getting wrong.
So
Strength and conditioning,
conditioning.
just in case for anyone that doesn't know what S&C means. For me, it was just kind of going into the gym and just lifting weights here and there. And it probably was more the visual than the performance side of things. And so that was something that I've amended. And I've got Nick Garcia, my strength and conditioning coach. He is amazing. And so 3 sessions a week will now be specifically tailored for running specifically. It's not even just like strength, it is tailored to improve, my muscle density, the level of impact that I'm going to naturally be incurring from just stamping on that concrete ground, if that's what it is. The conditioning side of things is really key for the results to come out the way they have there. I and my team will be incredibly happy to hear.
It's a superb result. And I think a lot of people don't realise how fundamental strength and conditioning or resistance exercise is to endurance sport. Again, anyone watching those 76 marathons wondering how you did it, you must have had the strength to do it. So I think we see a couple of things. We see a really significant aerobic base, which contributes enormously to energy, but we also see visually another form of fitness that isn't measured here, which is the retention of muscle mass despite all that energy expenditure. So we should probably stop there because it's such a great win. But we're going to march on. We're going to march on. Now, an area that you flagged as not being great is sleep. And from a sleep point of view, again, when we look at this visually, we would see on a timeline of the time we measure, green represents when your body's in a state of physiological calm, and we might call that restoring or recharging energy. Red represents physiological stress, blue represents physiological exertion. So we're starting to quantify over the time that you wore the device, how often you're spending in different states. And when we look at sleep in particular, we're interested to see that your sleep actually is pretty good.
That blows my mind because I just feel like I'm constantly awake. Although I'm in a sleep.
Yeah. So you're asleep, but
I feel like I'm awake. My mind is so active. Like my thoughts are so active.
Really interesting. There's 2 different parts to sleep. So sleep is, of course, our biggest opportunity to restore energy. In fact, it's really as the human battery puts itself on supercharge overnight. We can restore energy during the day, but that's our big opportunity. What's going on in the physiology is not always exactly the same as going on in the brain. So when people talk about different stages of sleep, you mentioned deep sleep earlier, that's a different brainwave pattern to dream sleep to light sleep. And you raised a really great point earlier in terms of since your daughter was born, you feel deep sleep has suffered because that's an evolutionary trait, right? You're listening out for her to cough in the night. You're listening out for an intruder who might break in. You're listening out. And if you're in deep sleep, you can't listen out. So what we find in lots of parents or people who are unable to unwind a suppression of this deep or slow wave sleep that means that they're much easier to go into a wake state. That doesn't necessarily mean you won't restore energy. And what we're seeing here is, despite the fact if I measured your brainwaves during sleep, I may not see perfect sleep stages, like you say, an hour of deep sleep, which isn't terrible, by the way. It's not optimal, but it's not terrible. What we are seeing is your volume of energy restoration during the night is really good. And energy restoration is one of the major reasons we go to sleep. So I would expect this person on the chart to wake up feeling relatively refreshed.
I think the only problem is probably the lack of hours of sleep. So for me, I think when you look at them saying on average maybe 8 hours is the most effective, but then you're going to have people that would push back on that and go, well, it's all relative to the individual. 5 hours to one person might be 8 hours to another. I would say on average 6 to 7 hours probably max is what I would get in a night.
Yeah.
Sometimes 5, depending on sort of how late I've gone to bed. But yeah. That's something that I would love to improve on. And I think there are definitely ways in which I can achieve that.
So from this data set, that doesn't cry out for an improvement. Now, your story suggests that there's room for improvement. I think when we look at your sleep, again, I'm interested in how deep your body goes into recovery, and we measure that through a fairly cool variable called heart rate variability. And your transition into sleep means you do go into deep recovery. And one of the major reasons for that will be that you've created what we call quite a significant sleep pressure with all the physical activity you do. in layman's terms, your body gets tired and that drives it into quite deep recovery. So we're seeing another benefit of your physical activity in how deep you go into recovery. Also, you have a strong percentage, 90% of the time that you're in bed, you're recovering energy, which is another good stat. If we were nitpicking on your sleep, it would be the fact that you don't go into recovery until you're asleep. So have you heard of this phrase, sleep hygiene?
No, but I'm about to learn about it.
You are. Now, it's not about washing, because that would be very uncouth of me. Sleep hygiene is about how we clear our mental inbox in that sort of last hour, 90 minutes. In the fact that if we take the example of your daughter, India, you've got to go to sleep believing no one's going to break in. And so how we convince our body that it's got nothing it needs to lie awake solving is largely determined by what we do in those last 90 minutes. So do I abstain from 24-hour news? Do I abstain from a thriller on Netflix? Do I abstain certainly from anything that would raise my core temperature? Do I have a wind down ritual, etc.? Do you have any ritualistic behaviors around that build up to sleep?
Yes, I mean, what I've really come to realize with sleep is, number one, pillow makes such a difference to my night's sleep. If I don't have a specific pillow, I will not sleep well.
Wow.
So this sounds crazy. The anxiety that I incur from staying at friends' house or hotels, if that pillow is not to my liking, I've written that night off. Basically, I just can't. It's just constantly like trying to find positions. It's the texture of it almost. Not to. I can't even describe it. It's kind of funny because when I actually show people are like, it's not even a pillow. It's one of those weird ones where it's incredibly flat.
Yes,
but it's not firm, but it's just more just for me to sort of like place my head on rather than me sink into it.
Can I assume you take this with you now?
Well, yeah, sometimes now it's got to the point where I, like for the challenge, I 100% took that with me because that for me, it doesn't really matter where I sleep. If I've got that pillow, I'm pretty cushy, to be honest with you. Things like light, I didn't realise had such an impact on me. So I went from having all doors and things open with that natural light coming in, whereas now a completely dark room will change the way that I sleep. Things like the temperature of the room. Now, although I don't have an aircon unit or something to kind of bring the temperature down, if the room is too hot, that will affect the way that I sleep. I think it's also, as well, for me, kind of got to the point where I've got a motorbike and a car. Although I don't want them to be broken into, I think life just works out in mysterious ways. And unfortunately, there might come a time where it does. And I think rather than worrying each night, is this the night it's going to get broken or stolen, I think you just have to accept that that's just what comes with the territory of living in London, right?
Yes.
And just ensuring when my daughter's there, there isn't anything there that she could possibly harm herself with. If she decides to go cut fruit at 4 a.m. or whatever it might be. So I think it is just being at peace. I think one of the bigger issues for me is probably being on my phone in bed, like so many people do, whether that is watching a documentary, just that blue light probably is going to be stimulating me. So again, I think the issue with sleep is more self-inflicted rather than me being a bad sleeper.
I think that's a very fair point. I think 60% of people in the UK have a sleep issue. 30% that's a pure play insomnia or sleep apnea where you can't get enough oxygen in. And the other 30% are probably taking actions and behaviours that just make sleep counterintuitive. The blue light one's really interesting. It's now been evidenced that screen will suppress this incredible, again, hormone melatonin that your body wants to make in the evening. So light stops us producing this incredible hormone that actually is a precursor for growth hormone, which is what you need to lay down the muscle tissue after your weight training session or repair those cells after a heavy aerobic session. So that would be a really interesting observation that because everyone else does it, we've sort of started to glean it as acceptable, but it's wildly, again, counterintuitive to human physiology.
Yeah, I mean, something I started to implement was cold plunges. So an hour before bed, and I did find I was having a deeper night's sleep. The issue, though, was I was originally just using hosepipe water, which would be anywhere from, say, 15 to 21 degrees. And the feeling of dopamine after that was amazing. But equally, the sleep I would have would be great. I've now got this filter system installed where I've reduced the temperature down to 8 degrees. And I would say it makes me feel physically worse than better. And I think that comes down to, if you are remotely run down, I think by being in those temperatures and them being so low, it almost magnifies it for me. And I don't feel like my sleep is improved by the temperature being reduced. So it's an odd one, where one argument is it's more effective for the recovery, flushing out the lactate, but actually I liked the way that I felt more so when the temperature was warmer. So I don't know, maybe it's a case of me just having to alter that temperature again.
I think you've solved your own problem. But equally, it's interesting, particularly when we cross between two worlds, the management of mental health and the management of recovery in people who are doing extreme volumes of sport. Cold water immersion has sort of risen to the top. It can be great, right? So when you're in cold water, one of the natural defense mechanisms is to slow everything down, and that will normally be associated with an increased sense of calm. It can build mental resilience, but you're getting that from your other events. It can also be stimulating. So when you come out, some people get a rush from it, and actually, as a sleep aid, we're often finding people who do it in the evening find that it doesn't help them do that. But like anything, it's the dosage and the context. So if you suit better a slightly higher temperature delivered at a different time of day, you don't need data to tell you that sounds about right.
For sure.
But cold is a really impressive intervention that we haven't quite understood the perfect deployment of it yet. It's not a panacea. People saying I can continue to lead my lifestyle and cold plunge and everything will be all right. It doesn't work like that. But I think for you in that toolkit, it's definitely something to keep exploring. So sleep is recovering. Now, we've got to sometimes compare ourselves to perfect and say that's not what we're after. If you're waking refreshed, that's great. If you can improve your sleep hygiene, that's a really relevant piece. Your backbone of all of this is, of course, how physically active you are. But I think on the stress piece, I just want to cover that as the last bit, is the fact you'll see between the point when you wake up and the point when you go to bed, there's no green on that graph. And that means that during waking hours, you're not at any point convinced that there's no threat. Your body's always got one eye waiting for the car to get broken into, for India to pick up a knife in the kitchen, for something to derail. Is that how you feel?
Is this during...
This is during waking hours.
So as in like during the day?
Yeah, during the day.
Wow, so there's no green at all? At all. I think the problem is I think it's because of the environment I've been raised in. I'm a worrier. The anxiety that I would say I've inherited has come from the trauma that I incurred because of my experiences. I found from a very young age that I was in a position of creating preventative measures to stop things from happening. So my problem is I'm very analytical. So my mind never switches off. I'm always processing the room for things, and sometimes there just isn't something to be processed, right? And I think because so many things in life have happened where people have done you wrong, again, you're probably constantly in the back of your mind, again, just almost like protecting yourself from something before it's even happened. So, again, I think that's just a process. But the nice thing is just the reason why I'm a lot calmer about this now is I had a conversation with a woman who I admire greatly when I once went to her thinking I had depression again. And she said, if I was to remove these situations from your life, would you still feel the same way? And I said, no. She went, you're not depressed. And I was adamant that I was. She went, you're not depressed. You're situationally unhappy. And that changed my life forever. So for me, I look at this right now, and rather than it having a negative impact on me, it's just one of those situations where we know we can improve it. So therefore, I see it as a positive more than the negative.
It's an enormous positive. Yeah, and the fact that, let's also bear in mind, this physiology is completing 76 marathons in 76 days. So this is a high-functioning physiology. I think where that becomes interesting is that the way you're describing the way you look at it is sort of a modern-day problem. And you've got it, as you've identified at quite a significant level, but most people are scanning, looking for the next problem, the next thing that can go wrong. And when we look at brainwaves, we often find that as what we call a hypervigilant pattern. You're walking down the street, seeing that car might swerve, that person might mug me, that might fall off the building and land on someone, where someone else is walking down that street and they're going, oh, I wonder what I'll have for tea. And they're both walking down the street. The same thing's happening to two people. It's the perception of what's going to happen next that defines your physiology.
Yeah.
If I lay that out and say that you are scanning and you use the word worrying, have you ever done anything that's reduced that? Have you ever tried any exercises to bring more calm?
Do you know what? This is one of the biggest challenges, though. And this is my view, you can do as much work as you like. If you are in close proximity with an arsehole, it's really hard to improve that, because you are constantly being the person who is trying to rectify that situation. But if that person isn't willing to meet you in the middle, as far as I'm concerned, you're only ever going to be at 50%. And I think that's my problem right now. Is it's a case of, I'm in certain environments with certain people, as I've touched on, which needs to be improved, and that's probably why I'm finding myself in utter red by the looks.
We could define that as too many assholes.
Anyone
syndrome.
That's listening to this now is going, I wonder who that is.
Yeah.
It's all of you.
It's not you. I think, and again, there's 3 layers to buffering stress. There's one is change your environment. Right? So let's imagine we get rid of that arsehole. 2 is say that arsehole is a close relative and I can't get rid of them legally. Then still your perception of them will be the biggest trait of what you look for. And then your reaction to your perception. And that 3rd layer brings us to things like meditation, things that reduce, if we sat here now and we did a breathing exercise, physiologically we can turn you green on that graph, despite you being in the presence of an arsehole and thinking they're an arsehole. So there are ways and means we can pull our physiology into recovery despite the environment we're in. But ultimately, if that environment remains, the problem will reoccur. So I think whenever we look at how we drive more recovery, we always try and think of 3 layers. Can I change the environment? Can I change the way I think about the environment, which you've done a lot of work on? And can I change the way I react to the environment, which you've also done a lot of work on? But that graph just shows there's scope for improvement in that area in terms of bringing more calm to Josh's day.
I would love, so a few points. I'd love to be able to do this test again, but do it, for instance, at home and actually see what difference that made or makes.
Home is in green.
Norfolk, exactly. It'd be so interesting to see the transition of how green that during the day would be. I think it would have been fascinating to have done this during the 76, to actually see again, like I said to you, I was at such peace actually, whether there would have been more green during the day. Thirdly, this is really random, but I'd be so intrigued to know what the Prime Minister's results to this would be. It would be mental. Surely it'd just be red permanently.
It's a great question. The challenge there is only if you perceive there to be stresses. So lots of
true. Exactly. I made an assumption there. Probably the most relaxed person on earth.
Well, the reality is when people think about stress, they assume people in higher levels of seniority have more stress.
But then they are, again, it's adaptation, right? You find yourself in that environment. It's something that you're used to. So what someone may perceive as stressful to another person, like the challenge.
Exactly right. So, here is, stress finds you where you're at. And someone who doesn't have many worldly pressures but perceives pressures everywhere will be far more physiologically stressed than a prime minister who controls most of the variables affecting him or her and doesn't create as many stress reactions. So I'm pleased, Josh. I think let's go back to the headline here. We got a guy breaking world records in athletic performance in endurance challenges. We've got an extraordinary high level of cardiovascular fitness we knew, which is incredibly attached to a huge muscle mass and volume and reflects so well on your training intensity. We've got, again, a clear relationship with food that's working well for you with the controls that are in place, but the forgiveness that it can't be perfect all the time. But you're also recognizing it's not feast and famine. You're not cheating and then adhering, cheating then adhering. It feels like there's a real balance there. We haven't got perfect sleep, but we've got enough sleep recovery to keep you propped up. And we've got, enough stress recovery through your sleep to keep you propped up. But if we're fine-tuning that area of improvement in the future, it's how do we bring more recovery to the day and possibly get your sleep onset slightly sharper with some sleep hygiene. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it really does. I mean, I'm incredibly happy with that. I think 85 out of 100 is not bad. That's probably the highest result in any test I've ever had.
Well, you deserve every inch of that. Not only that, a great ambassador, in the way you speak about mental health, in the way that you have embedded lifestyle. As you say, you have to work harder than some people to get a reduced benefit. That is sometimes the way the world works. Your ecosystem is going to be required forevermore, and you've built that, which is extremely powerful, extremely impressive, and I think a lot of people will benefit from hearing that today. So thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. I think like I said, to be given this opportunity, it's great to sometimes show the flaws of the individuals. Just it makes it far more relatable for people. I think rather than just putting yourself on this pedestal, like I said, it's about the connections that we make, and the more people can see themselves in you, I think the more of an impact that we can actually have. So today was so insightful. Thank you so much, and there's a lot to work on moving forward.
Thanks so much for watching The Energy Equation. We love having you on this journey with us, and stay tuned because we've got some iconic guests coming up. In fact, here's a sneak peek of who's coming on the show.
I'm very energetic about life and what the day can bring me.
You're finding a bit more purpose in giving other people energy.
100%, yeah.
I used to think of energy as being coffee. I used to think of energy as being fitness. My definition of energy has changed.